Afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us on this bright afternoon, although I'm not convinced it's going to last until the weekend, but it's certainly better than the last weather we had at the last webinar. The topic for today's session is about reopening safely, which is obviously something that's on everybody's minds at this moment in time. So it's really good that we've got a good panel together today to talk about these issues. I'm just going to start with a few housekeeping rules. One of them, for those that are technically minded, just to say that for those that are using the webinar functions, that apparently it's a better experience if you use Google Chrome. So that's just for people to know. If you have any audio or video issues, apparently that will be rectified if you press the refresh button. We would also like it if you could use the chat function to introduce yourselves, really, because it would be great for us if we can see who's participating today. It's a great way for you to network with each other as well, because obviously with not having the face-to-face meetings, we have missed that kind of contact between each other. But in previous webinars that we've had, it's been good to see that interaction taking place between people, despite it being virtually. The other thing as well is just to say, if you've got any questions, please can you use the Q&A tab that you'll see on the right-hand side of the screen. And what we'll try and do towards the end is to get through as many of the questions as possible. If we can't get through them all, we'll obviously take them away and come back to you with responses that will hopefully help you. And finally, we're just conscious as well that it is holiday time, and a lot of people that perhaps might have wanted to participate today haven't been able to. So the webinars are always recorded, and they will be it'll be uploaded onto YouTube. So if you've got any colleagues that want to watch it later on, or you want to watch it again, then obviously you can access it through the YouTube function. So I'm going to start getting into the webinar itself then. As we've said, it's about reopening workplaces and reopening them safely. And I think we've all come to the realization now that the way that we're living at the moment with the coronavirus is going to be with us for some time yet, until they can find a safe and a reliable vaccine for this particular virus. And I think what it's going to mean for all of us is that we're going to have to manage those risks associated with it across, not just our personal lives, but also our working lives as well. And we know that lots of employers are now considering about, how they're going to reopen, how we're going to kickstart the economy again. And workplaces are already looking at how they can adapt the physical space, but also looking at different ways in terms of using different systems and functionalities within the organisation. So this next kind of 45 to 50 minutes, we're going to try and look at learning, sharing best practice, and just basically looking at how employers can adapt to living with COVID. We said at our last webinar, which was all about employee engagement, about how important it was to have effective employee engagement, just to make sure that the workplace functioned effectively. And I'm sure that many of you have involved your workforce in the consultation process in terms of how you're going to approach reopening safely. But also some of them might have been involved in collaborating with you to co-produce your risk assessments. But it's not just about the kind of physical aspects of being in the office environment or the work environment, whether that be a factory or, a supermarket or wherever. There's also lots of other factors to consider too. So, it's things like the journey to work. It's about interaction with customers, with the public. It's about conforming to the legal requirements and the never-changing, guidance that comes out on a regular basis. There's the impact of test, track and trace systems, but also being acutely aware that there could be a second wave and a second spike of this virus as we go into the winter months as well. I don't think any of us envisaged that this would kind of be a situation would be in kind of 5 months in, and it seems quite surreal still for lots of us. And I think that's been exacerbated by kind of the prolonged lockdown, the confusing messages, the inconsistent approaches that we've seen. And I think for lots of people, and certainly some of the feedback that we've heard, are that people feel, it's knocking their confidence and anxieties are rising. So therefore, it's crucial that employers basically instill that confidence in their workforce, and that they've got clear, transparent actions that will ensure that the employees are provided with a safe and secure working environment. So we're really lucky that today we've got a fantastic panel with us, some really good experts that will help to initiate some of those discussions and hopefully get you thinking about what you can implement within your own organisations. So I'm going to do a quick introduction, and if our panellists can just put their hands up when I introduce them, that would be fantastic. So we have Gareth Turner, who is from Transport for Greater Manchester, and Gareth, his role is around Head of Travel Change, which sounds a very exciting job role, but I know that you've been incredibly busy with lots of very difficult aspects, haven't you? We've got Doug Russell, who's from USDAW, which is the Shop Workers Union, and Doug's the Health and Safety Officer there. So again, lots of challenges over the past few months as well. So I'm sure there's lots of helpful information that can be provided. We've got Aaron Williams, who's an Environmental Health Officer from Manchester City Council. Again, another busy person. So it's great that everybody's given that time today to help us and look at some good practice. And last but by no means least, we have Carrie Westwell, who's Director of People and Culture from Peel L&P, who's going to give us an employer's perspective in terms of how she's been approaching, or how Peel have been approaching reopening the workplace. So what I'll do now is I'll just open up with some questions, and I'll go to Gareth first. So Gareth, obviously before employers can even start to think about how they're going to manage staff on their premises, one of the big concerns, and we keep hearing it all the time in the press, etc., and employers have fed it through to us as well, is actually getting to the workplace. So we know that you've been doing lots of work in this area already. You've issued guidance and we've seen all of that, and that's really helpful. But can you just give us kind of an outline in terms of the approach that you've developed to help to support employers, and give us some of the key issues that they think they should be considering to support the employees, and also kind of being mindful as well that I think some of those concerns that employers and employees have will probably be heightened a little bit as we know that schools are going to be returning and there's going to be lots of demand upon the transport infrastructure. So it'd just be great to hear what your thoughts are on all of that.
Yeah, thanks, Carol. I suppose the first point, the key point, we know that transport is a key issue for employers. As you say, everything that we've done, the research, the surveys that we've done, we hear that people are concerned about travelling on public transport. So in terms of managing sort of the network as we go into autumn, it's really important to recognise, and you've alluded to the uncertainty, so as much planning as we can all do about any aspect of this, there's a huge degree of uncertainty. Therefore, in terms of transport, we've got a collective role to inform employers and employees about their travel choices and to assure them that travelling is safe on public transport, make sure that they know what they need to do in order to get to places to work safely. I think what I'll try and do is set a bit of the context on the network and where we are, explain what TfGM have been doing, and then explain what employers can do for their employees. So you'll be aware that on the 1st of August, the government gave greater discretion to employers about whether their staff return to work rather than the previous work from home message. At the same time, they changed the messaging on public transport from avoid unless you are a key worker and making an essential journey to public transport is available for everybody to use. It's important to be aware within that the guidance on social distancing didn't change. What that means is that capacity on the public transport network is reduced. So to give an example of that, on bus compared to pre-coronavirus, capacity is about 50%. And on Metrolink, it's at about 25% at the moment, if people are adopting the social distancing guidance, which is 1 metre plus. So that means 1 metre plus all the mitigation measures of wearing face masks, washing your hands regularly, etc. I think, as I've said, it's all of our responsibility to manage the challenges and our capacity. We've been working with business representatives, been working with the growth company, with local authorities, and as you say, with the education sector. So we've got to recognise that in September, all of the schools go back. And that's a huge spike in demand across the network. Primarily, certainly secondary school and college students use the bus network, and there's a potential that that demand will clash with the return of employees to places of work. So really talking to people, trying to gather intelligence so we can then still take a step back and review it at a network level and see where the congestion hotspots potentially are, is what the first thing we've been doing in terms of trying to understand what will happen as we go into September and into October. So in terms of the things we've been doing, we've been working with transport operators to review that intelligence and to ensure that as best possible we can match capacity with the demand. So an example of that is on the Metrolink network. We've gone from a 6-minute service at peak times to a 10-minute service, and that basically means that we can run more double tram units. So those of you who use Metrolink will no doubt been frustrated when a single tram turns up and you can't get onto it. Well, the impact of that is amplified with social distancing measures and the risk that instills. So in terms of making those decisions and reviewing the intelligence about where we need to deploy double units across the network, that allows us to make sure that people can remain socially distant from each other where possible. As you'd expect, we've been enhancing cleaning regimes and doing the communications that goes along with that to try and reassure people that travelling on public transport is safe. As no doubt you're all aware, a lot of this is about communication and clearly communicating with people and making sure they're aware of their personal responsibility and what they can do to make sure that whether it's travelling to work, whether it's being in the work environment, they're behaving in a way that reduces the risk to themselves and others. So on public transport, that means wearing face coverings. It means remaining distant from other passengers and transport staff. It means washing your hands regularly because it's proven that it works in terms of reducing transmission of the virus. And it means, so on public transport, paying with contactless methods where possible. So most of the transport operators operating in Greater Manchester either accept contactless payment with contactless bank debit cards. They'll have apps which allow you to pre-purchase tickets. They'll have smart cards which allow you to pre-purchase tickets. And reducing that kind of cash handling will have a huge impact on potential transmission rate. So in terms of what employers can do, I think, again, it's talking to your employees. It's considering how best they can travel, they can work and travel safely. In some instances, that might mean that if you can support them to continue working from home, and that's the best thing for them. It's making them aware of the guidance that we've made available to you and will be making available to you again. So I think the Growth Company is sending out a toolkit and we'll be providing a fact sheet that goes along with that. That will include sort of the contact details if you have specific questions and you want to get in touch with my team to ask things and further advice. I think there's so in terms of travel demand management generally, there's something we call the 3 R's. So that's retime, remode, and reroute. So in terms of a framework for conversations with your employees and things that they could be considering, it's things like, can you avoid the peak? And can you as employers support your employees to avoid the peak? For some businesses that won't be possible, but for lots it will be. It might mean someone starting at 10 o'clock and working until 6 in the evening rather than a traditional sort of working day. It means we can manage the capacity at peak times on the network when we know that schools have tried to stagger their start times, but they can only do it within a sort of a short period at the beginning of the day. So we know there's going to be demand at peak times. So the more that businesses can do and we can do collectively to move demand out of that peak, the better. In terms of remoding, so those of you who live in Greater Manchester and have been here recently have seen that the districts have used some of the money made available by government to reallocate road space to cycling and walking. So if we can remode, and we recognise that for lots of people that won't be an option because they live too far away from their places of work, but for lots of people it will be, and it's just a sort of a mindset change, and it might be that they walk a certain portion of the journey, which means that they're less reliant and they make a shorter journey on public transport. And in terms of retiming, I think, remoding, rerouting, again, it's just if you make a journey one day and you recognise that the tram is packed, then the next day you might need to consider making the journey a different way. I think that agility is something that's really important to emphasise and to discuss with people. The uncertainty means that, so I'll use myself as an example, prior to coronavirus, I could get on a tram at 8:15, or I could turn up on the tram stop at 8:15 in the morning, and I know I will be in the office for 8:45. Unfortunately, because of the limited capacity that we have at the moment and that uncertainty, it means that we can't be that sure about the journeys we're making as we go into autumn. So just making sure that employees know that they need to be flexible, but then also if employers can be flexible as well, just compassionate to the circumstances and recognising that if someone turns up 15 minutes late because they've had to wait because 3 trams have gone past and they're all full, then these are exceptional circumstances. So I think hopefully, Carol, that answers your question, provides a lot of information in a very short period of time.
That's really, really good. And I think that point you made about kind of the communication being key and being able to respond and adapt along the way, because we don't know what's to come, and you really don't know what the demand is going to be until things start to happen, do you? So it's kind of, a bit of a chicken and egg in a way, isn't it, to see what people's confidence levels are like in resuming onto the transport system again. And I like the retime, remode, and reroute. I think that's quite a good phrase to remember.
I think it is. I think at an individual level, but also if you are having conversations with your employees, then it is a really useful framework, particularly in the current circumstances, to be advising them of the things they need to consider.
Yeah. And good that you've mentioned about the hand washing as well, because it almost feels kind of that's, it's not been emphasised as much as it was at the beginning of the pandemic, but yet that has been proven to have a big positive impact, hasn't it? And it's simple things.
It has, absolutely. In terms of, I know that there's some ambivalence about the wearings of face coverings, but the evidence is there to prove that it works. And in terms of, the evidence is particularly there to prove that it works in terms of improving consumer confidence, be that in shops, be it on public transport. So I think it's really important, both for ourselves sort of individually, but being respectful of others, that we follow all of those steps.
Yeah, no, that's really good. So I'm going to move over to Doug then now. Doug, obviously many of your members have actually been working right through the pandemic, and it's absolutely brilliant that they have been recognised as key workers, because without them we would have all starved. But they've provided a valuable service to lots of others previously been taken for granted. And obviously what we've seen now is that when you do go into shops, for example, you see the sanitation stations, you see the perspex screens, you've got the arrows on the floor with the one-way systems. But a lot of it, and the success of that, is all down to human behaviour, isn't it? So from your experience, what do you think are the essential elements of creating a COVID secure culture within an organisation?
I think we've had experience across the board, because yes, you're right, a lot of our members were in shops that remained trading all the way through, or in distribution centres providing those shops, and in food factories. But we've also had examples of workplaces that did close down and are just beginning to open up now. And as an employer ourselves, in fact, we enclosed our offices and sent everybody home, and we're in the process now of opening up again and hope to start up again come September. So we're actually going through that process with our own staff of how we actually manage the transition, as well as in other places. And I think, obviously, the COVID-19 risk assessment is crucial to this, and it's important that when you do that risk assessment, what you don't do is just go and get a template somewhere off the web that says all the right things and use those fine words without actually putting any meaning behind them. The talk of communication has been mentioned already, and that's obviously very, very important. The more you can involve people in that, your own people in that process, the more they'll trust the risk assessment itself when it comes out. But it does mean being as precise as possible about things as well. So, for example, I've seen lots of risk assessments over the last couple of months that say things like, we're going to have an enhanced cleaning regime, which is all very good, but it doesn't say what that actually means in practice, how they're going to identify what areas need that enhanced cleaning, how frequently it's going to be done, who's going to do it, and all that kind of stuff. And that's the sort of stuff you really need to go through in detail with your staff if they're going to have confidence in the process. Similarly, they'll all say things like, we're going to enforce 2-metre physical separation in our workplace. And then the next line down, it says, but where we can't do that, we're going to rely on people wearing face coverings and PPE. And of course, that just completely ruins the first message. And it is important that the two most crucial things that can be done in the workplace are maintaining physical separation, either through distancing or through use of barriers and screens, and maintaining good hygiene through enhanced cleaning and through hand hygiene, either with soap and water or with sanitization stations like you see in the shops. And unfortunately, because everybody's been focused so much on the issues around face coverings and masks and what kind of masks you should be wearing and all that kind of stuff, and in the initial stages as well, there were lots of people who seemed to think that somehow gloves gave you some kind of magic protection against the virus as well. Everybody focused on that individual, what the individual was wearing, and not on the actual systems in place that actually made it possible to achieve what you need to do. So really, when you're doing that COVID-19 risk assessment, the places that we found have been most effective at doing it are the ones that have started off with, and it's not new for anybody who's been doing health and safety management for a while. There's a hierarchy of control measures that you're meant to apply to any health and safety hazard in the workplace, starting with what you can do to eliminate the hazard in the first place, then what you can do to alter the way you do work so that you remove the hazard as far as possible, then looking at the engineering controls and administrative controls, and then at the bottom of the heap, looking at PPE as a control measure in the system. And I've seen some very clever work done, which helps to explain how that hierarchy maps onto the management of COVID-19 in the workplace. Obviously, there's a bit of a journey for people when they come into work, which you can use very usefully as well when you go through the process. So it starts with the transport to work, and actually that's an unusual one for lots of employers, because traditionally, as far as health and safety at work is concerned, the person's commute to work has never been seen as a responsibility of the employer. It's your responsibility to get yourself to the workplace, however you do it, and it's only after that the employer takes an interest. But quite clearly, particularly after what Gareth was just pointing out, employers are going to have to pay more attention to how people can and can't get to work at reasonable times, particularly where they're dependent upon public transport if they're having to use it. I noticed today in Scotland that Nicola Sturgeon is actually refusing to announce when what they call non-essential call centres and offices in Scotland are going to open, because she doesn't want loads of office workers piling onto public transport at the same time as school children when they're going back to schools in the autumn. And she sees that as a very important trade-off to try and control the spread of the virus, which is an interesting approach to how to do that kind of thing. So but once you get to work, it's how you get into the building in the first place as well, and there's all the stuff about staggering arrival times, making sure if you've got a clocking in system, you don't have people hanging around the clock waiting to clock in, having one-way systems in and outdoors so that people don't bump into each other in a door place. And then there's all the business about the traffic control and flow around the building and what you can do to control access to toilets, changing rooms, canteens, all that kind of stuff. I mean, there's loads of good guidance out there now and that sort of stuff and what needs to be done about controlling those sorts of measures. But it only works, again, if you actually do talk it through with the people involved. I think one of the best examples we've come across as a union was actually Next Warehouses, because Next Warehouses, they could have continued trading all the way through, because obviously they wouldn't be delivering so much into the stores, but they could have done their online trading all the way through. There were certainly other businesses doing that kind of online sales of clothing and materials of that type who did continue to trade all the way through. Some of whom were probably even less essential than Next. I'm still not convinced that the people need to be able to buy Disney products all the way through the process, but Disney's warehouses didn't close down, they kept trading. But Next decided to close down, and they followed their staff for about a month. But almost immediately after they closed down, they got the union safety reps involved in those depots back in with the managers and started the planning for how they were going to open the warehouses up safely. So they were involving the reps right from the very start of the planning process in how that was going to be done. They then brought people back in small groups to actually build up the numbers in the warehouses and gave them a couple of days of induction in all the new measures that were in place. And it's the fact that people can see that there are new measures in place, which is crucially important in all of this. There's lots of people who are going to be very, very frightened about coming back into work after being off for that length of time, particularly if they've themselves got some vulnerability or they're living with somebody who is perhaps clinically vulnerable and they're worried about bringing infection back into the household. So the more they can see that there's a difference and the effort has been put into protecting them, the more confidence they're going to have in the system when they come back in. And the way in which they involved the people in Next was actually very, very useful. I actually got an interesting little quote from one of the reps there, if I can find it very quickly, just to read to you. Who said, "I've been very impressed with what the company have done at our site. They really put health and safety first. The changes do affect productivity. Operations will be slower because you have to walk further to do things. But management's primary concern has been safety, and thanks to all the work we've done, staff have been able to come back to work earlier and come off the furlough scheme. Most staff are just happy to be back at work." And I think that's very, very illustrative of the good work that was done at that particular one. The confidence was there, and it was spread by the people involved in the process to their mates when they came back into the workplace. So those are the key things I think that we need to do when we're trying to do something about it.
That's great. And I think you're right. In that risk assessment, it is about gaining that ownership from the workforce as well, because and gaining that kind of clarity as well, because that's the only way that you're going to gain that confidence and trust in the employer. And I think that while people are feeling anxious, sometimes you don't always absorb information in kind of a lengthy document. But if you've got almost like the clear instructions, and in doing the induction, like you've said, to go through it as well, gives people confidence as well, because it is going to be very daunting for lots of people to go back to the workplace, isn't it? So as much as you can make it clear and concise, and people know what they're doing, that gets that confidence back, doesn't it?
It does. And there's just one other point on that as well, which is crucially important in all of this. And that's the first stage of that hierarchy of control is excluding the root hazard as much as possible. And we've still got to have in place systems that support people who do need to self-isolate, whether it's because they've got symptoms and they need to self-isolate, or because they've been caught out by the test and trace system and told that they have to self-isolate under that. And for lots of organizations, I'm afraid, just relying on the fact that people get basic SSP if they've earned enough to actually be qualified for it when they do that isn't enough to actually do it. But the growing evidence that some of those food factories where we're seeing big outbreaks in the country, it's because that was what they were relying on, and the people just couldn't afford to take the time off. It just, because the wages are low, they don't have build up any savings. They can't afford to take time off when they got symptoms, so they were coming into work when they knew they shouldn't.
No, that's really helpful. And it kind of links now into kind of Aaron's area as well. I'm going to come to you now, Aaron. And obviously, as an environmental health officer, you are responsible for the enforcement of health and safety legislation. And obviously, you're going to be getting involved in the test, track and trace systems. And I know you've been busy because the conversations that we had. Your approach is obviously, about engagement and education as much as it is about enforcement. So can you give us any kind of insight into the advice and guidance that you are providing to employers at the moment to help and support them in what is a very complex and changing environment for many of them?
Hi, Carol. Yeah, so obviously within Manchester, we've got various businesses, different types of businesses, and before a lot had reopened, so I've done a lot more with hospitality than any other sector. Just before everything opened, people were contacting us about what do we need to do, what steps we need to put in place. We know obviously we have to put control measures, but what's the legal process? So first of all, we start looking and asking them and guiding them towards the government website, like everyone's alluded to, and everyone knows that things are developing and changing quite regularly. For instance, the restaurant and the takeaway guidance is changing near enough every week in terms of the requirements. So businesses, they want to get reopened and they go, right, what do I need to do? Thankfully, the government has got some good things in place. One of the first steps is it has got a designated reopening your business section that you can go through. And what that does is help develop your controls and bringing you specific sector guidance and control measures to start creating your risk assessment. And like Doug says, that is fundamental in your business. Once that's set up, it sets the procedure for implementing your control measures. It's got to be detailed. It's got to be a working document. It's got to be rolled out. And of course, implementation is one of the key things that we're pushing and trying to educate. And at some points now getting towards enforcement for that. So for businesses, it's looking at them 5 steps. So looking at the risk assessment, developing cleaning, hand washing and hygiene procedures, people working from home where possible, social distancing, or putting in mitigation where they can. What I would recommend is like I say, the government website, they have got their specific areas for guidance. So if it's retail, close contact, restaurants, there's a long list there. And it is a lot of reading. There is a lot to go through, but it's really important for getting the tools down to create your risk assessment, to put control measures in place, to have a good working practice. And it's like a lot of things risk assessment related. They get put in place and they adapt and they change and they're updated. And it's for the business owner to look at that and think, right, well, we've started doing it this way. We might need to change it and make it more simple, or more stringent for employees, and just working it all the time. From my point of view, what we're doing is, we go through a graduated approach. Some businesses have been open a while now, so we are getting to the stage of, right, is this business going to actually do what they're going to do, or are they not? And do we need to step in and enforce that? There is still people that have created a risk assessment, and we do this, we do that, and we've got these controls, and they're just not working. So it's that management of it. It's about adapting and changing it, and I think that's one of the key thing for businesses is it's not just a document. It's not just, oh yeah, we do this, but what happens when people bring tables together? What happens when people don't fill in track and trace? What do we, how do you solve them issues? And the guidance documents are, there's a lot of words there. There's a lot to go through, and you need to go through and pick out what you want. Manchester, we've got our own web pages where we've broken down, and a lot of councils have. They've broken down the control measures, and we've got template risk assessments on there. And to make it easier, you can just drag and drop. You can just pull off what you need, and you can go through it. And of course, our officers, although we're busy, we still will help and educate, and the key is gaining compliance. So a lot of my work has been around that, and then depending on the areas is working towards enforcement. But there is that graduated approach. It's within every enforcement authority, and it's just for businesses to start going through them steps on the guidance on the government website and keep up to date. Really, I'm not going to lie, it's a hard work. It's a revolving wheel. It keeps going. It's Manchester, now we've got local lockdown restrictions, and they need to be reflected in the city as well. And you're spinning plates all the time, really. So it is tough for businesses, and we try and assist businesses where we can, like anything within food safety or health and safety. Give guidance, give support where possible, but of course, there comes a point with businesses where enforcement may be the option, often the last option. So
yeah. It sounds from your approach that you're working with businesses, you're bringing them along with you. You're trying to educate them at the same time, and I think you're right in that it is difficult to kind of navigate your way through it, because you've got the national guidance, but then, like you've said, we've also got the local restrictions as well. And it's how those two kind of work together, isn't it? Yeah, definitely. And for instance, a lot of people in hospitality and various shops as well have all changed their models. We've had to remodel for different purposes. So a lot of entertainment venues have gone to being like a pub style or a restaurant. So the managers there are like, well, what do I do here? I'm changing this, I'm changing that. Is this, I've done the risk assessment, I've put these controls in place. Does this look all right? And you're like, well, yeah, you can do this, tweak this, do that. Look at this guidance. Look what the industry guidance says, and just pull in information from there. And it should come together in a safe way. And providing them 5 steps are gone through for COVID security, and you're doing as much as you can within the guidance to that effect or better, it's working to obviously protect the public and prevent spread. That's good. Carrie, I'm going to come to you now. Obviously, as an employer that's kind of putting all these things in place, and obviously running, you've got a multi-site business, you've got presence at Media City that people will be familiar with, you've got presence at the Trafford Centre. So all of this must have thrown up so many unique challenges for you, because it's not just about the site, it's about some of the multidisciplinary roles that you have as well. So can you give us some insight in terms of how you've managed with the process, and how you've tried to ensure that your employees can return and feel confident when they return?
Yeah, hi, Carol. It's been interesting listening to everybody's... Oh, am I still on mute? No, have I come on? There I am. It's been interesting listening to everyone else on the panel, to be honest, because I'm sort of, it's sort of echoing the various different things that we've been contending with over the past few months. We've got lots of obviously multidisciplinary sites, as you said, and our sort of predominant communication to our people right from the beginning has been it's all about the health, safety and well-being of our people, and we've maintained that stance throughout the whole thing. We've obviously been trying to follow the government advice as best we can, as difficult as that's been sort of over periods of time. Obviously, we've done the risk assessments, we have involved our people, we have reached out and done things like surveys to be able to understand how people are feeling about things and to get that feedback. And I think that's a real key for me. I'd say to any business is make sure that you're listening to your people and what they're saying. And I suppose that brings me on to a slightly different aspect that we haven't spoken about, which is there's people who are working from home who maybe aren't finding it very comfortable, who are finding actually that their mental, their social, their emotional well-being is suffering actually from being isolated from colleagues. And that's something we've been very conscious of as we've gone through the past few months, is really making sure that we support people whilst they've been working from home, but also now looking at this transition back into the workplace. We also have tenanted buildings across our portfolio, so we're working with our tenants in terms of making sure their buildings are safe and fit for people going back. So we've got that to deal with. But as well as that, making sure that obviously our risk assessments, we've involved people, we've got the signage up, the communication piece has been absolutely categorically the most important thing I think we've done throughout the whole piece, and we've tried our best to keep everybody up to date with where we're up to. But we are sort of slowly starting that transition back. People are coming in. Really, we're kind of being driven by our people in terms of how they feel they're comfortable, which I think is we're very, I suppose, fortunate to have a lot of office-based workers who can work from home, and so we are able to to facilitate that, and that seems to be working quite well. But I am seeing more and more people are wanting to engage. There is things that come from that personal interaction in terms of innovation and working together and that social contact that are really important. And so now we're trying to make sure that people do feel safe in those workspaces as they come back and are being able to do those things again that they perhaps haven't done. And we've focused on things like e-learning as well, so somewhere that we can make sure we've got a consistent message that's going to our people, and that's an interactive platform that we've got, so people can really take some good learning from that. And then we're going out again this week with another pulse survey to understand, again, where are people in terms of that journey themselves. And we've also done some assessments of working from home practices for our people as well. So we can make sure that they've got what they need to work from home safely, because that's another aspect. Clearly, we all went from being office-based overnight, we suddenly are home-based workers. Making sure that people have what they need to be able to work in an agile way. And we see that as the future for our business, is people working in more of an agile way. We embraced flexibility. That was a key part of last year's push following the results of our Sunday Times top 100 companies listing. That was one of the pieces of feedback. People wanted to work more flexibly, so we embraced that. And now, working more agile going forward, which I think a lot of businesses were, and that helps, as we spoke about transport before, the congestion that we have in this area. To be able to move away from that, it's important that businesses are playing their part, and that's something that we want to do as well.
I think that's really good, and I like the fact that you're kind of trying to take that fear away from your employees by having those consistent messages and looking at ways in which to communicate with everybody, like using your e-learning, etc., and that you're being driven by the voice of your people as well. But I also like the fact that you've kind of mentioned there about the working from home, because not everybody will be returning to their usual workplace prior COVID. For many, working from home is going to become their new work environment for the foreseeable. So I think it's good that you kind of included that in terms of your strategy for reopening safely as well. So that's really, really positive. We have had a couple of questions in. So I'm just going to look at them now. Okay. So the first one, which is probably kind of more for Doug and for Aaron, is when we are so focused on making workplaces COVID secure, Are we in danger of ignoring some of the more traditional health and safety risks, or indeed creating new unintended risks? So who wants to have a go at that one first? I thought it'd be Doug and Aaron Street.
No, you go, Doug.
Yes, I mean that's actually a very important issue. I mean, just one very practical one. A lot of organisations decided to try and start propping doors open in corridors, for example, so you didn't have to touch doors when you're pushing them when you're going through them, which is fine. But of course, if that's a fire door and it's there for a purpose, then you can't actually prop it open unless you've got some other means of automatically closing it when you need to do so. There's been some concerns about putting up lots of physical screens and barriers around people can interfere with the airflow around the building as well. And we know that when you've got restricted airflow, you're more likely to get transmission of the disease as well. So there's all sorts of other things have to be borne in mind. You're still going to comply with general health and safety legislation when you're doing things.
Yeah.
And there's one specific issue which is very important for organisations that are customer-faced or client-faced, and that is that we've seen it in retail, and I think it's been seen in places like public transport as well. Levels of violence and abuse have been rocketing in recent months, which is quite concerning because that's something that has to be managed very, very carefully. Mm-hmm. The vast majority of the public have been great with coping with all the changes that have been flung at them through the COVID pandemic and all the things about queuing outside the stores and keeping your distance inside and now wearing face coverings on buses and in stores. But there's a significant minority who, either because they're frightened themselves or because they're just rather nasty people, are actually being more violent and abusive in that process, and that needs to be managed very much as well.
Yeah. I think that's a really difficult one to kind of manage as well, isn't it, Doug? But I think one of the things that I think we should be all proud of as a human being race is how resilient we are. And, we do kind of adapt and change as much as we can do, but sometimes we are let down by some who don't behave in the way that we would want them to. So, yeah. Aaron, did you want to say anything on that one as well?
Yeah, it's because, COVID's on, it's so focused upon other practices and procedures. They're not neglected, they're just put to the back burner, really, and they're a bit overlooked. And, at the end of the day, health and safety should be within the culture of a premises in a business, and it should be routine. And that's definitely something you need to avoid, like Doug said about fire doors and ventilation and these aspects and PPE and face coverings and just ensuring health and safety is still maintained and it doesn't become the overall focus of COVID. And I mean, strange enough, we kind of have the opposite in some premises in Manchester, where COVID seems to be the only controls they have, as opposed to some premises where right, if you're not, you transport or work and all these other aspects. But violence is definitely one at the moment where there's a lot more confrontation, there's a lot more interaction, there's a lot more rules, you could say, in premises.
Yeah.
And it is causing a bit of friction, and so the COVID risk assessment, it's got to be within your company. It's got to be blended in, so to speak. It can't just be with the COVID premises and things are shut up and closed off and barriers and this type of thing. It needs to fit in with your premises and put the control measures that are relevant to your business, that are practical, that will work, not just slamming everything in because you're a bit worried. And I find that a lot now. They seem to go over and gold plate the controls and the measures, and you're saying, well, why are you doing this? Why are you do you can you do this without having barriers everywhere and screens up to the cost of just moving some chairs and tables? So of course, health and safety always has to be relevant. It has to be put in place, and it can't be overlooked. But COVID should be a bit smoother. It shouldn't be taken up all the time as well for businesses. So it's difficult because it's focused on, but them other aspects need to be looked at as well.
It's getting the balance right, isn't it? And
it is exactly the balance.
Sense as well. Yeah,
it is.
I've got a question here for you, Gareth. This is from Matthew. Will there be any cooperation between Network Rail, Northern Rail and Metrolink, for example, about cross-ticket use, as would happen if there was a severe delay, for example?
Okay, thanks for the question, Matt. I think so there won't be the same type of cooperation, and the reason for that is that it's not a sustainable commercial model. If you think about it, for that cooperation to happen, there needs to be commercial cooperation based on a confidence that each individual operator, who are all private companies, have the sufficient capacity to serve their customer base. What we have recognised, both within TfGM, and we own Metrolink network, but then I know also within the train operating companies and the bus operating companies, is the need for ticketing to adapt in order to meet the flexibility requirements that COVID has brought about. So what we've done, we've introduced a Carnet style ticket, so called the Clipper, and that's basically it's a smart card which contains 10 products which you can use sort of flexibly over a period of time. They have them in the bus operators and the independent watchdog for passengers on public transport in the UK. Transport Focus released something over the last couple of days calling on the government and the train operating companies to do similar, to make sure that as people start to return to work, that we're offering value for money fares and flexible fares that allow people to travel. What we can also do, there's an organisation called Greater Manchester Travel Cards Limited, you may be familiar with under the brand of System 1 Travel. So they provide products which allow people to travel across operators, across modes within Greater Manchester. So as we go through the next months and we get more sort of demand intelligence, as people start returning to work, we'll work with them and with the operators to review those product set and ensure that those products exist that allow people to choose to travel flexibly, be it on tram, be it on train, be it on bus, and that they can make those decisions in real time about which mode they use, rather than committing at the beginning of the week that they must use tram, not knowing whether or not the capacity will be there on the tram network, for example.
Yeah. It's a case of keep monitoring it, isn't it, and seeing what happens.
It is. I think that the mechanisms for those multimodal products and those flexible products are in place. Do the products exist today? No, not in all cases. So it's really sort of as an industry, the transport industry needs to be responsive to that intelligence that comes in over the next couple of months and respond accordingly.
Yeah, no, that's good. I've got another question. So this is for everybody. So at the beginning of the reopening phase, we looked at lots of international approaches, so across Europe, New Zealand and Canada, etc. So do any of the panel have insights on best practice from abroad? Are there any exemplars? That's got your thinking caps on now.
I don't think it was the change of practices. So I went to Belgium just before the lockdown took place. Sorry, the restrictions for quarantine rather, and I think it's more, the information was a bit more accessible and easy to work through. You know where you could wear a mask, where you couldn't, what you could do in certain premises, which you couldn't. In terms of the culture over there and people, I think embraced it a bit more. But I don't know, we seem to roughly be on the same lines. I don't know.
We're all learning as we go along.
Yeah, I think everyone's got an opinion on when things should have been open and changed and brought forward and back. Yeah, I think of Belgium really, and it seems to have been a bit smoother, a bit more easy in the transition. Everyone seems to be a bit more focused. I think that's mainly from promotion from the government. But yeah, that's all I can think of.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I have got a question for Carrie now. Carrie, this is from Matthew. This is about your e-learning. So is the e-learning training for staff before they return to work, so they can be told about how the office will look, traffic flow in the office, etc.?
Yeah, so the general e-learning is very general to everything, you know, all the aspects of signage, hand washing, you know, lift usage, all the sort of general practices. We do have one, because we do have some retail outlet stores, so we have one that is store specific and one that's more office specific, and so it helps with that kind of customer facing role as well that we do have in parts of the business. The other things that we are doing is we've done some brief videos of our workplaces, which will be coming out shortly. So basically a sort of, you might have seen them for some retail businesses where it's a sort of walkthrough, if you like, of, you know, what it looks like, what it feels like, where the sanitizing stations are, what you should be looking out for in terms of signage, etc. So we'll be releasing those shortly. So it's a bit of a combined approach. And then obviously the leaders of each of the teams have taken responsibility for passing down the risk assessment information as well. So we're making sure that as people are coming in, they're fully informed as to what exactly they need to do. And the general communication as well is always that people can reach out to my team at any point in time. You know, if they're feeling uncomfortable about any aspect of what's going on, that we're there to listen to them.
Yeah. I think if people have got an idea about what to expect beforehand, that alleviates a lot of concerns and anxieties that people have. So I think that's really good to do those videos. So hopefully other people will take that on as good practice. I'm just conscious that we're approaching near the end now. I'm just going to check whether we've got any kind of final questions before we finish, but I've certainly found that very interesting. One very, very last question is about if an employee doesn't isolate when requested, who has responsibility for enforcing this? Don't know if that's a Doug or Aaron question. It's quite a tough one, that, isn't it?
Sorry, Carol, just repeat the question. Where is it? Sorry.
So yeah, it's just that if an employee doesn't isolate when requested to, who has responsibility for enforcing this?
It's usually on the employer, but it's usually then through track and trace asking them to do it. We've been involved when we've approached businesses where someone has been exposed, and 9 times out of 10 the employer sends them home. Goes through track and trace who they've been exposed to, and takes that. I'm not sure exactly who would enforce it. Probably us, but the thing is, we've also got, like Doug was saying, people have returned back to work when they shouldn't, and they're still in isolation. So it is quite difficult of how to do that. I could probably put something on a little later with the confirmation of who.
Yeah, I think it would depend a little bit on the specific circumstances of a particular situation. As individuals, we've got a duty to isolate when we're asked to do so, and there are circumstances where the individual can be fined by the police if they've not been doing it. But you're right, if the employer clearly has a responsibility to support you if you need to self-isolate. And I come back to that point about making it possible for you to do so, and income is one of the most important factors.
Yeah.
But I certainly can think of examples where people have actually been put through the disciplinary process because they knew they shouldn't have been turning into work and still came into work in circumstances.
Yeah, it's all new territory for everybody, isn't it? And it is going to be difficult to kind of monitor and manage that. And I think as time goes on, we'll start to kind of see how people are implementing it and look at what best practice looks like. So, and
practically, it's going to get more difficult in the coming months because we're coming into the winter period when flus and colds will circulate as well.
Yeah.
The same symptoms as the COVID-19 virus.
Yeah.
Lots of people will be having coughs and sneezes and thinking, well, should I go in or should I not? And there'll be that thing where some people think, well, I need to go in because I've got to go in because I'm essential to the business. It's getting people to understand, actually, no, if you've got symptoms, you stay away until you know what it is that you've got. This is going to be the message we're going to try and get across.
Yeah, definitely. There's also incidents of people being asked to test and not doing tests. So it's as much as you can with the employer, but how far, and I guess it comes down to their own policies they may have created around coronavirus and the testing and it is difficult because people want to get to work. That if they're not at work, they're not getting paid, and you know, we really push the fact, say, look, you know, people have to isolate. They have to be sent home. It's not, you know, they have to. So it's, it is a difficult one.
Yeah.
It is a difficult one.
We're going to have some challenges over the next few months, aren't we? But hopefully there'll be good things that come out of it that we can all learn. And, you know, it's just a case of sharing any good practice that we have amongst each other and supporting each other as well, isn't it? So we're at 5 to 3 now. So we've had 55 minutes. So I just want to thank the panel, because I think everything that you've said today has been so informative, and certainly the feedback that we're getting on the chat is very positive. It's been really, really useful, and lots of information there for people to take away. We will put something on our website after the event. The webinar itself, as I've said, will be uploaded onto YouTube. But yeah, just want to thank everybody that came along and participated. But a special thank you to the panel who have given up valuable time, because, you know, you're all very, very busy people with huge roles on at the moment. So thank you for giving us this time today. So have a good weekend, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.